It is Friday, April 10th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Starfield episode of LTPS. It's been a surprisingly busy week. There's actually a number of things going on. So, as always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The April PS Plus games are now live on PSN, finally, so you can claim those. And let's get into our first news story about the PlayStation Store, because Sony is still not done removing Shovelware publishers from the store, which, as a brief recap, if you remember back in January, they kicked off 1,200 games from a singular publisher, and then last month, in March, that was another 800 games between two publishers, and now 3 more were kicked off. That is Go Games console publisher, they had 33 games, then VRC Forge Studios, 20 games. I think they're the ones that put out the Jesus Simulator, and this all happened on Sunday, ironically, which was Easter, and then Welding Byte SRL, 11 games total. So not a massive kickoff this time around, but still a number of publishers that are finally, I guess, in some way, shape, or form, are probably breaking a policy change or a policy that Sony's finally enforcing. We don't know what's going on outside of it seems very clear that Sony is finally doing something about these games that can be very predatory, with basically selling you a platinum trophy or their asset flip games with hardly any content on there that clog up the store, because every time these games come out, they always have separate PS4 or 5 versions to sell you 2 platinums, which eats up 2 tiles on the screen. We all know why they suck, and it seems like Sony is finally doing something on a consistent basis. We'll keep watching this to see how many games they do kick off, which at this point is nearly 2,000 PS4 and PS5 games. Next up, Sony has been rolling out a new PS5 UI refresh. So this past week, a number of people have been saying, hey, I've got this new change on my console. And what they're doing is making a somewhat minor, but actually kind of big change to the way we navigate on the console. So ever since 2020, the UI has looked principally the same in that for the top left section, you have a separation of games and media, and you can tap between those with L1 and R1, or go up there and change them manually. But now what they've done is consolidated PS Plus, the PS Store, games, media, and your library to that top row, so you can still tab between them with L1 and R1, but it just makes it that much faster to access those things, and they no longer live in the horizontal row of recently played games. And then the far left has your welcome hub, and that's your proper landing page when you boot up the console. So it's minor, but at the same time, it's like, that's actually kind of big, because the console has stayed the same since 2020. The biggest changes, if anything, have been the removal of resume activity on game pages, which is then basically saying they're not going to be using the jump to particular portions of the game through activity card section. Activity cards are still on the console, but they no longer navigate you directly to those portions of the game. So resume activity was removed, and then the other one was the welcome hub, and now this changes the navigation to make it that much faster, because admittedly that's probably the one thing that is a bit annoying. I remember on PS4 there was always that shortcut for L1 and R1 to jump to the very left or the very right of that horizontal row. So it looks similar in practice. I mean, I've seen people call it the XMB. No, it's not like that at all. It's still, navigation-wise, it functions like the PlayStation 5 always did. It's just consolidating those icons so you don't have to do all these unnecessary directional tabs over to get to Plus or the store. So it's a small change, but also one of the bigger ones we've seen, and it's this late into the life cycle. So I would say it's a net positive, and it is something where it's server side. I think you can manually check for this in system settings via a system features update, which is that weird sort of fork of not a firmware update. It's not beta as far as I'm aware. You can manually check, restart the console, and then see if you have it live on the system. But it'll probably be gradually rolled out to more people as the week goes on. Moving on, we have more evidence of Sony walking away from PC single-player games based on some slight changes that Asahi has been making to their own backend, and players are now noticing that. So if you remember, we had the cross-buy icon show up on the PSN backend. It was never actually deployed, but we saw that, and also the PS5 and PC icons. Well, those are now gone, but they've been gone since December. So at least back then, which I don't think we covered it back then, but you can chalk that up to, oh, okay, maybe people noticed the cross-buy icon, they're not ready to use it yet, so they took it down. Well, now, in light of of the rumors, we can see why that might have made sense. And then also the other big change is the update to the webpage for all the PlayStation studios, which Bluepoint naturally is now gone, but they did add Team LFG, and each one of these did get a description update. So Nixxes says they still specialize in high-quality PC ports, but also they co-develop with the other PS studios worldwide. And for Valkyrie Entertainment, it used to say they worked on PC and console. Now it says they co-develop on franchises like Astrobot, Helldivers, and God of War. And then XDev, they added the word exclusive, so they work on exclusive titles for players worldwide. They're minor changes, but also it gives us a clear direction of there probably is something going on, especially because this is, again, the kind of news where they're not going to... It's hard to confirm, right? We have to have years go by if no PC single-player games, or if they do have a requirement to answer to a shareholder, if they want to be very open about how there's a change in their strategy. And they probably will say something, I would have to imagine, on the next fiscal report in light of the rumors, too. So they probably will be asked by somebody, you would have to imagine. And so that might be one way we get a confirmation as well. But at least in the meantime, we do have some very deliberate changes going on that players can openly see. Moving on to a new limited edition DualSense controller, and this one is for 007 First Light, which is a very gold-looking controller, which would make sense for the property, but it's got the 007 logo on the front, and then it's got a more subtle like line theme going on throughout the controller. It's still mostly gold for the color scheme, but it's going to be available for pre-order on April 17th. Cost is $84.99 USD, and it comes out with the game on May 27th. Now, we've seen this game, like Hogwarts Legacy, is a very big property where Sony has that deal in place of not simply the console marketing rights, but usually that also comes with a dedicated state of play and a separate controller. So they're really pushing this game. It's not too surprising that this one got a controller. If you're wondering why this gets a controller and various other games don't, you know, it really depends, obviously. But yeah, it's a pretty well-known property. So if you're into collecting and you want this controller, it's going to be available for pre-order very soon. Next up, PlayStation has announced a new way for one lucky winner to get their face and likeness scanned into a PlayStation game if you are the lucky winner of the new Playerbase program. So Sony announced this new program where, sure enough, it's very much that. They're starting off with Gran Turismo 7, where your likeness will be used as a character portrait in the game, and then you'll also get to design a permanent car decal for the game as well. You'll get to go to the studio, have a whole thing. So what you can do is apply on PlayStation.com, and this is nutty. So there's going to be rounds of video interviews in order to select the winner, and the winner is going to be based on your history with the brand, evidence of owning products, games you've played, subscriptions, your trophies earned in Gran Turismo, and you'll also be judged on your authentic love for PlayStation and Gran Turismo. So they are genuinely serious about you are going to be picked based on just being a mega fan, and also there's an element of you have to be somewhat entertaining, authentic, and probably somebody that's good for social media purposes. I would imagine if you win, you're signing away your rights to be used in all that kind of material. So at first I read this program or saw the headline and I'm like, ooh, wait a minute, this sounds... Are we getting into a weird predatory thing where Sony wants to en masse get a bunch of people to sign away their likeness rights to be put in games as NPCs? You read into it, it's not that. It's really it's a singular giveaway. They do want to do it with more games, so I guess we'll see based on the other games how many people they allow in, for example. But otherwise, this sounds like a very by-the-book giveaway where like one lucky fan gets flown out and they get this whole first-class treatment. We've seen various publishers do that over the years, so I don't know. They say this is for the fans. I mean, if you're into this sort of thing, give it a shot. Good luck to you. I hope it's a fun experience, but otherwise this seems very, I don't know, whatever to me, I suppose. Let's move on to some PlayStation Studios news with Ghost of Yōtei Legends. The new raid just came out today, a very new difficult raid, which I guess it's so hard that Sucker Punch made this deliberate choice to not offer matchmaking. They did say they're going to offer it later, but they did air out there that, hey, this new raid that's available today, April 10th, it's going to be very hard. You might want to coordinate with friends or people on the Discord. So I'm not sure if they did that because they know players are going to matchmake in and get beat up right away, so they want a window for people to know that they need to level up and get better and try to coordinate better, or if it's just something that they have to implement down the road. I'm not entirely sure, but I did see a lot of player feedback be very upset about that, which it is annoying to not have the matchmaking available right away, but we are at least seeing Sucker Punch start to deploy new content for Legends after its launch from not too long ago, so that's at least encouraging to see. Next up for Insomniac Games, we have this new report for their California Burbank office. how the lease renewal is up, and it seems like they're going to renew that lease and actually expand it. So we're hearing they're going to expand up to 65,000 square feet in the Media Studios campus. So that does bode well, at least in light of the news that we've seen a lot of layoffs happen in California because the wages are so much higher there. So we had that recent discussion about the more broader video game industry space, and what we saw throughout 2025 is that there's this very deliberate change of the California workforce being reduced and a lot of outsourcing happening overseas because wages are the primary cost of game development. At least in the case of PlayStation, while this does not mean that they're going to hire more or they're just bringing on so many more people or this, that, and the fourth, but it's a pretty clear indicator that they believe in the talent, the studio, and the space itself to expand and probably enrich the quality of life experience for those employees, and perhaps, yes, bring on more people as they ramp up multiple other projects that they have going on. So it just seemed like a more positive story in light of what has been going on for that California workforce. Moving on to a rumor and some fan speculation for a new Uncharted game in development at Naughty Dog. So what happened here was over on Instagram, we had the creative director at the studio, Sean Ascagi, where he posted this photo of a very old-looking cannon overlooking a scenic ocean view, and Sean titled that post, "Research ... Now, over on the Reset Era PS Studios OT, we had the user XX spot this location as Fort George and Trinidad and Tobago, which is a very on-brand Uncharted location, so that's one thing. But with this post now being a thing, people speculating about it, we had Tom Henderson on the Insider Gaming Weekly podcast talk about this news, and he mentioned briefly that Naughty Dog has flirted around with the idea of an Uncharted 5. He doesn't know what they want to do, but that the studio did look into it before COVID. So that's all we have, really. Now, it's important to remind people that Sean, he came back to Naughty Dog in 2021. He did have a small stint at Crystal Dynamics being the creative director on Marvel Avengers, but prior to that, he had that same role on The Lost Legacy. When he came back to Naughty Dog in 2021, he got that same role again on The Last of Us Part 1, and so now he's doing something at Naughty Dog. If you remember our previous rumor from Daniel Rickman about how this is a new Uncharted game, and he is the one directing, you know, it's one of those things where if there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, the photo itself might seem innocuous, but that is what these studios do. They do site visits, they do field research. It's a very normal thing, and so it would actually be very plausible that that is what's going on. And at least for Uncharted itself, right? I mean, it's been a long time since we've had a mainline entry, nearly 10 years, less so for The Lost Legacy, but, you know, I think Sony is probably in a position where the franchise has been dormant enough and they want something that is going to mitigate risk for, you know, they're risking everything right now, or they're risking a lot of money with Intergalactic. It's a new IP. These publishers are very scared of new IP. They're letting them do that, but also they lost a lot of money on The Last of Us multiplayer. So I think they, at least for Naughty Dog, want them to be in a position of maybe shipping something that can be a little bit safe after Intergalactic based on how that does or does not do. That, and it's like once that ships, they can scale up and do full production into this game. And I would think that with at least the Uncharted 5 2020 before COVID thing from Tom, that lines up with that Bloomberg report from Jason Schreier about how, you know, that was like a property that Ben could have worked on, for example. They were proposed that and they said no, they don't want to be put on that game, which that's one of those weird issues of Sony maybe had that proposition to them. But as we often remind people, the studios generally have their own autonomy. They can make pitches and do their own thing. So they said, we don't want to do that. And that's why Ben is still in the position that they're in, which is trying to pitch and make a new game themselves. So with all that in mind, I would personally be ready for a new Uncharted game. It's been a long time. It's just a matter of what would it be. Would they do a Nate story again? Which, you know, I think a lot of fans can safely argue we don't need that. And they set up where the franchise can go. But, you know, if we're talking about financial risk mitigation, you kind of want to tell a Nate story, but I don't know, the name itself could be strong enough to where we could have a new protagonist, and I think you all know based on that ending from Uncharted 4. Moving on, we have more God of War sex minigame news, which I can't believe this is coming up as often as it is coming up, but we have a new opinion being thrown into the ring here, and this time it's from the OG voice actor himself, T.C. Carson, who is reprising his role in these remakes. And so recently he was at a panel, and so he was asked by IGN if the sex minigames are going to return, and in a very cheeky manner he said, quote, "You know what, all you dudes, all you men, I think so." And then IGN jokingly said, "Breaking news," which TC clarified, again, all in a very lighthearted manner. People are laughing. He said, "I think so." So he's just clarifying the "I think so" portion, which gives him that plausibility to not get in trouble if he did basically release something or tease something. Which, I mean, they're not really allowed to do, but I don't know. Like, some studios care, others don't. Depends on Sony as a publisher. I'm sure they're never really happy when these things happen, but, you know, that, I guess that the context is everything, right? Like, you have a Norman Reedus saying, "Oh yeah, Death Stranding 2 is a thing." That's a little bit bigger than something like "Oh yeah, the sex mini games are coming back." Well, wait a minute, I said I think so. I don't know. I'm still surprised how often this is coming up, but a lot of people do simply believe that they will get removed or changed dramatically. I think they should be in there, and I think they will be in there. This is maybe the one opportunity for them to maybe make them a little bit more, I don't know if tasteful is the right word here, because they do have to be somewhat crude in manner, and it's very in universe with Greek. It's very historically accurate. So, you know, everybody's already made the same statements here of they should be in there. They are a product of their time, but they're still historically accurate. Yeah, I think they're going to be in there. Moving on to a checkup for Bungie and Marathon based on this new report from Paul Tassi writing for Forbes, where it goes over the player numbers and the current status of the game, which everything in a vacuum does seem reasonably okay if you judge it simply on that, which is that the player count, while it is down, it's still somewhat healthy. Hours played is looking pretty high per player. The review scores are now finally out there. So if you judge it on those merits, it's not all bad news, but the budget is a different story. So Paul says they can confirm the budget was over $200 million, likely more than $250 million, not including cost for maintenance and new content, which thus far we've seen the game based on Alinea Analytics and Paul's previous report, the 1.2 million sales primarily on Steam, which Sony doesn't realize full revenue on Steam. You know, they're looking at 50-something million dollars, but likely much less than that at this point for where the game is. They're likely very upside down. That budget number, he says confirm. I don't know why you can't confirm that per se, but if you've got solid sources saying that's what it is, it seems like that's probably a safe ballpark because, yeah, it's multiple years based on wages in Bellevue, Washington. So they are very likely, yes, upside down by a substantial amount on this game. But that's what we were talking about before. They're in a very rock and a hard place area with Marathon in that you can't abandon that player pool. They paid $40 up front to get in. There is a player audience there, right? It's not Concord, it's not Highguard, it's not any other failed live service game. It's there. It's just not there for a very high budget video game from a studio like Bungie, which has a lot of staff working on this game and new content. So how committed are they to this long road of trying to make the game profitable? And how do you do that with a genre that's fairly niche, or at least the player behavior within it? And again, this is the outside looking in, so I always have to preface this with me not being an authoritative opinion on this. I know I don't play these games, but it would appear as though it's a very hardcore audience. It's shoot on sight. There's not really that mass appeal that this game has. And that's problematic for a game with that 9-figure budget in place, right? So it's hard to say what addresses or fixes it. To me, it sounds like, yeah, you do something that has broader appeal, which is PvE content, something that somebody like me can jump in and not worry about getting completely beat down and and maybe just have some fun against bots. But like that's, again, I'm not an authoritative opinion on the matter. But for the time being, we will watch closely what happens with this game because there is a long road to try and make the numbers work, and how committed is Bungie and Sony to making it work, that remains to be seen. Moving on to a rumor for the next State of Play presentation, and this one is not for the end of May, early June timeframe. We actually might have one much sooner next week, based on this rumor from Nate the Hate over on Twitter, where they did say we should have a State of Play before June, which at the time he did not confirm a date, but in a follow-up post he said he's heard of a potential one on April 16th, which might be more third-party focused. Now, interestingly, somebody before Nate the Hate put the April 16th date out there on Twitter, and so the user Alir says that we should be getting the end of May, early June State of Play as well, and that should have the first-party stuff. Now, mind you, we were also hearing at the same time that AC4 Black Flag, the remake, that is going to get shown off on the 16th as well, and that was reported by the Reset Area user Blackbait and then corroborated by Insider Gaming. So conceivably, you're looking at maybe some third-party stuff on the State of Play that's on the 16th. That would be where they show off Black Flag. If that is like not something where it's just you know, a coincidence, but otherwise it seems like that might be what's happening. And state of plays, you know, we've said before, sometimes they're predictable, sometimes they're not. And at least for this one showing up in April, initially I'm like, oh, that's really soon. Is that where we see Wolverine? Is that where we see the Faye game? But it's like, oh no, if we're still getting the early June one or late May, whatever it ends up being, then you know, that stuff's probably still there. If there's anything first party at this presentation, probably a Saros trailer because it's right before the game comes out. But maybe there's a handful of things for a 20, 30-ish minute state of play. We'll have to wait and see because they'll probably confirm that on Monday or Tuesday or something for going live on the Thursday. All right, moving on to more next-gen rumors. This one is for the PS6 handheld in particular, where these two rumors come from Tom over on their channel. Moore's Law is dead yet again. So I know people have been so far uneasy about Tom as a source, but as we always add these qualifiers, correct about PS5 Pro stuff, had an SIE takedown, Power Saver did line up, and we have Digital Foundry corroborating the information that Power Saver mode is treated as a separate performance profile behind the scenes based on internal Sony documentation. So with those things in mind, he put out this video actually last Thursday. So this was when I was filming LTPS. We were a little bit too late to cover this, but I'll still get you brought up to speed on what Tom is saying here. So in this video, he shows off this diagram that he had to recreate from internal documentation at Sony, because if he shows the real thing, he might get another SIE takedown. But it's showing off CPU core availability for base PS5, Trinity, which is PS5 Pro, and the Power Saver mode. Now, this is supposed to corroborate his previous info of Sony recommending developers make sure their games can run on only 8 CPU threads, because this documentation shows that Power Saver wants 8 thread utilization, which does line up with Tom's previous spec leak where the handheld is supposed to have 4 Zen 6C cores, as in 8 threads total. So Tom is making the argument that, based on thread count, Power Saver doesn't need to be restricted to 8 threads, because if Power Saver was indeed only for reducing power, Sony could just reduce the clock speed, for example. But since they're doing this behind the scenes, this is evidence that they want that fallback compatibility mode for the handheld itself. Now that's one element of trying to corroborate the existence of the PS6 handheld, or at least Power Saver, because we all are in agreement. Power Saver, it's like, yeah, you have this net zero goal by 2040, but it's what PS5 owner is turning that on and using it, right? So it's still very plausible that that's why that's there. Anyway, going into the next rumor from Tom is that there's a new SDK feature, in SDK 13 for PlayStation 5 that Sony recently deployed based on a source speaking with Tom, a Sony source rather. So again, this is what Tom is claiming, but this new SDK feature is called PlayGo, and they say it's very similar to Xbox Smart Delivery, and that a game executable can now distinguish which assets need to be downloaded based on the hardware itself. So what's being described here is that PS5, PS5 Pro, and now the Power Saver mode, they will have their own separate asset and texture packages that could get downloaded to the hardware that you have. Currently, when you download a PS5 game, that single executable carries all the modes. So if you don't have a Pro, it doesn't matter. The 90-something gigabyte file, possibly larger depending on the game, you are downloading everything for that. So, in theory, this is somewhat similar to Smart Delivery. I'm not sure if that's the best analogy. Smart Delivery is for retail-based Xbox One and Series X games, so based on the console, for the disc you insert, it has stubs of those games and it pulls the one appropriately. I mean, PlayStation's very similar. Sony just did a very one-way path for disc upgrades. And also with transacting on the PS Store, you see PS4 and PS5 versions. But I digress. I mean, the basic point here is that for a single PS5 and presumably PS6 game executable, you'll be able to download just strictly the assets that you need. And so this would be something that the consumer doesn't even see. Because, for example, the PS4 5 thing, you see that when you transact on the store. You see the 4 and 5 versions. You have the autonomy to install PS4 on a 5 if you want, right? In this case, I would think that you wouldn't be allowed to do that, just in the interest of Sony making sure that, these are considered separate performance profiles, also keeping the file size for these games in check if you don't have a Pro, and for the handheld where it doesn't need the massive textures for base PS5 and PS5 Pro. So everything that's being said right now, and again, this was already corroborated from Digital Foundry with the Power Saver mode being treated as a separate performance profile. Everything thus far, there's no red flags to me. There's nothing here that says, I don't believe that. That sounds insane. This is silly. Tom makes good points, and a lot of it's from him, sure, but there's nothing that sounds unusual. If this is what Sony is attempting to do and they want this fallback compatibility layer, and they have this new option for executables to have specific texture packages, which you would really need for the handheld, absolutely, especially in light of the storage costs. It all lines up. So we'll keep following this. It's next gen news, and so far it does appear to be making sense if Sony intends on launching a handheld in 2027 or 2028. Moving on to some new PS5 hardware sales data coming in from Japan, where, mind you, the console has always been struggling in Japan, but now with the recent price increase, we are seeing that effect happen, where we have the report from Famitsu for the week ending April 5th, and Sony sold 840 units of PS5 Pro and 558 units of the PS5 disc model. They are now firmly in historical Xbox numbers of not breaking four figures. Now, pertinently, the PS5 Digital Edition Japanese language-only model, which does have the same price, I don't think we mentioned that in the price increase stories, but that does have the same price, that sold 12,141 units. That's actually still being sold next to a regular, not Japanese locked Digital Edition, so I would imagine that is not really contributing much to the 12,000 number. But yeah, PS5 sales in Japan, which were already struggling, way off a cliff. I mean, those are bad numbers. The Pro too, the Pro is actually doing very bad in Japan ever since it did come out there. So it was pacing much more behind PS4 Pro, at least compared to the Western markets, where it was hovering around that 13 something percent in the US. And I can't imagine that's too far away, like in Europe, for example. But we have that first initial sales data coming in for the new prices, and it hit Japan like a rock, or like a brick. I mean, it's good Lord. I can't wait to see what the West numbers are going to look like, because they're probably going to be insanely brutal. PS5 was sort of poised to possibly catch up to the PS4 sales pace and exceed it, because we have GTA 6 coming, right? So there was all signs pointing to PS5 probably having some very good sales legs, and that remains to be seen into PlayStation 6, but Japan, this was ugly. Moving on to some emulation news. Now, we don't often cover this when it's unofficial from a third party, but every so often there's a big breakthrough like on our PCS3, and it's always noteworthy because what happened recently was the one contributor Elad discovered a new SPU usage pattern, and they were able to code a way to optimize them more. So now this benefits the emulator in all games, especially for SPU intensive games like Twisted Metal, where you can see a pretty big FPS improvement. So Twisted Metal is now 5 to 7% faster on average, which is really awesome to see. And something really cool is that James Stannard, who did the programming and SPU code on Twisted Metal back in the day, he quote retweeted this, and he said he was really proud that they got as much as they could out of the SPU back then, and they maxed out the PPU, SPUs, the RSX all at the same time, and he was convinced back in the day, that PS3 would not be emulatable, which, to his credit, he was right for a while. That's the thing about PS3, and I've said it for years, it will take a really long time. Not to undermine our PCS3, because they've been accomplished for a long time now at this point, but it's just that nearly 20 years onward, we're still finding these breakthroughs here and there, and there's still a number of games, a lot of games that have issues or problems on our PCS3, so, it takes a while to find these things, and it's amazing that we still get these breakthroughs every so often, because 5 to 7% for an FPS bump is not nothing to scoff at. All right, moving on to some third-party news stories, beginning with Cyberpunk 2077's PS5 Pro patch, where this one is probably one of the best Pro patches we've had so far, with PSSR2 support properly baked in, so you don't need to use the toggle in system settings. It has PSSR2 from the get-go. It also has a toggle for FSR 2.1, but it sounds like you really don't want to use that. PSSR2 is much better, and it does seem like an incredible enhancement for the game. Ironic, given that this was a very problematic game on PS4, so it took a long while and new hardware to play it the way that it should be played, but there's 3 new modes on the console. So there's Ray Tracing Pro mode with 30 FPS and a 120Hz 40 FPS option. The regular Ray Tracing mode is 60 FPS, and then Performance can target 90 FPS on 120Hz displays. The internal resolution is higher on each mode, with PSSR2 coming in to resolve that 4K image quality. And Digital Foundry's analysis concludes that you really should use PSSR, not FSR. The RT mode and RT Pro mode is probably the way to go based on your own frame rate preference. If you care for the compromise and the most RT features. There's not full RT reflections in the Pro mode, so there's still certain areas where there's screen space reflections, but if you want the most ray tracing enhancements turned on and you want that compromise, then the 40 FPS mode works the best on a 120 Hz display. Otherwise, the regular RT mode at 60 FPS is probably the way to go and the way to play and enjoy that game, because it does look dramatically different with the regular performance mode on the base console. So yeah, this really does look like a fantastic way to play the game, no doubt. Next up, we have a rumor for Halo Campaign Evolved and when it will release, based on this tweet from the unofficial Halo community account called grunt.api, and they put out this more obscure way to reveal the dates, but what we're hearing is July 28th is when the game is coming out. Early access is July 23rd. And that does line up somewhat with at least the idea that the game is going for a summer launch. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to have that day and date fan speculation people were thinking with, or rather the shadow drop speculation fans had for the Xbox Game Showcase, but it does seem to be in that summer neighborhood, and that's a very aggressive early access of a week ahead of time for a campaign that's known to people, so that's not the best, but you know, this early access thing is just not really going away, and it's a lovely way for publishers to get more money out of you, and some people do tend to bite on it. Moving on to some PlayStation Productions news, where we have some not so good news for Twisted Metal Season 3. Recently speaking on the Doughboys podcast, we have Mike Mitchell, who plays Stu in Twisted Metal. He mentioned that he expects to not return to the show because there was a big creative financial decision behind the scenes made by Peacock, and that means that there's going to be a huge turnover going into Season 3. So the showrunner is out, writing staff, several department heads. It seems like they're doing a pretty big clean sweep of a lot of people that went into making the show what it is, and him as a character is not showing up. Now, I haven't seen Season 1 or 2. I understand he plays a pretty big role in the show, so based on what I'm hearing, this sounds catastrophic. I don't know what to say or make of this, because it sounds like Season 3 is in trouble. I mean, you take out all the core talent that made Season 1 and 2 what it is, which were received very well, and now you're removing a key character. Wow. Awful news for anybody that enjoys that show. So if you're into the show, I mean, by all means, chime in. Let me know how you feel about this, because this sounds like it's almost effectively, I don't want to say over, but like when you get rid of all the talent, it's like, well, what are you doing? Those are the people that made it what it is. So I guess we'll have to see how Season 3 does pan out. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and for this week we have another game giveaway courtesy of Pop Agenda, where we have 5 codes to give away for Dose of Divas coming out very soon on PlayStation 5, April 14th. This is a very unique turn-based RPG where you're playing as 2 sisters who pilot a mech. It's a more simplified version of Octopath Traveler's battle system, but it also has elements of Cooking Mama with mini games, and it's a very colorful looking 3D platformer in the overworld, so very unique. Coming out soon. We have 5 codes to give away. If you would like to win, then follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting Pop Agenda will give you a number of ways to win a copy of this game. Thank you so much to Pop Agenda, and we will be announcing the winners next week because we are trying to give away this game. Those are all the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was another games industry interview about PlayStation VR 2, the VR market, what it takes to make VR games, from the CEO of Flat to VR, which is a very particular, newer studio that converts 2D games into virtual reality. I spoke with the CEO, Jasmine Aniza. I know a lot of people are not super jazzed on the VR topic, but I encourage you to check it out. We'll be doing a lot more developer interviews, so I want to try and field more of those, and it always helps with more people watching those. That way I can propose that to people saying, look, there's an audience, would you like to talk with me? And we do have more coming in the pipeline, so that was a great conversation with Jasmine, and more coming up soon. And then also we had, well, the full interviews up for Patreon and YouTube channel supporters. We also had the March Q&A finally go up, so I'm sorry that took forever, but it was nearly 4 hours. That's live. Click R3 should have been last night, so that's now on the Spawncast Network channel. And that's about it for housekeeping. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.